Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this week's Friday Reads, where I talk about everything that I read in the last week, what I'm currently in the middle of, and what I think I'm going to be getting to next week. And there is a lot to talk about, so we are going to just jump right in. And I started and finished Small Magics by Ilona Andrews. So this is a short story collection. There's 6 short stories, 4 of which are set in the Kate Daniels universe, 3 of those being following like characters we actually meet in the Kate Daniels books. And then there are 2 stories that are just kind of unaffiliated with any universe, I believe. So, I will say that I had already read like half of these short stories, so they were just rereads, which I enjoyed, but I had read them before. The of the ones that I hadn't read, the one Kate Daniels universe story that didn't follow any known characters, I liked, and I thought that it had one of the best explanations of like the world that we've seen in any Kate Daniels stories. So that was really cool to see. And then the other 2 that I had not read before were the unaffiliated short stories, and they mostly weren't for me because even though a lot of it was actually really interesting, they were romances, and like I just don't do short story romances because they very often feel very rushed to me, which I had in these stories. But overall, I thought that they were really good. A lot of these stories are available for free online, so like I wouldn't necessarily recommend that everybody has to pick this up, even if you are super interested in reading these stories, because a lot of them you can find online. But I did enjoy reading it. I do like having a physical copy, so I don't mind that I purchased this. But I ended up giving this overall 3.75 stars. And then I picked up The Deep by Amakatsu. And this is an adult historical horror novel. And we're essentially following our main character who was a nurse on the Titanic. And it sank and she survived. And now she's a nurse on, I don't remember the name of the ship. I think it's Britannia, but it's the sister ship to the Titanic that also ended up sinking. But in both instances, she feels like there's something going on the ship, that there's just things that aren't quite right, that are a little bit haunting, and the story goes from there. I DNF'd this at page 51 for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the writing style just really wasn't working for me. Long, kind of convoluted sentences with metaphors, really trying to set up the atmosphere, which is not generally my cup of tea for writing. And also, it was really slow. Like, we spent a lot of time on like these very specific parts to the story, and then like skipped ahead and then spent a lot of time, which is also not something I love. So it just felt really, really slow. And then I didn't love our main character. I kind of didn't care about the mystery. I just wasn't connecting. And then I went on to Goodreads to see if any of these issues resolve, to see if I should stick with it. And then I found out it was a ghost story, of which, and I don't like ghost stories. Like, I don't know what it is, but they just don't do it for me. So I decided to go ahead and DNF it. And then I picked up The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. And this is a young adult science fiction romance. And essentially, we obviously we're in the future, but aliens have come and taken over Earth, and they have outlawed anything that is kind of creative. So books and music and all that kind of stuff. Enter our main character of Janelle, who is running an illicit library. Like, she could be killed if it's found out. And then there is our alien character of Morris, who finds out but is very sympathetic and wants to find music. And so they go on a road trip together. And the story goes from there. And I also DNF'd this one. I made it, I think, about 30 pages. I read 2 chapters, one from each perspective, as well as the prologue. And it was I was just like, no, this isn't going to work for me. I don't like the writing style. It was very info dumpy and like in a way that I just did not like. And the world we were setting up and like the story that we were kind of setting up, I was just generally not interested in. So I just like, this isn't going to be for me. So I went ahead and DNF'd it. And then I picked up Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which is another adult horror novel. And in this one, there is an old house that is rumored to be haunted. It's basically been abandoned. And there is like a publicity stunt that is set up where they invite a bunch of like popular horror writers to stay overnight in this house. And it goes very wrong very quickly. And the story goes from there. And this is another one that I DNF'd. I made it to page 28. I read the prologue and 2 chapters. I don't like this pretty much at all. And it's partially because like, it honestly feels like the writing of a dude who, like a guy who was writing literary fiction and is deciding to try his hand at horror. That's kind of what the writing style felt like to me. And the thing is, I don't know if that's a purposeful thing to like mess with tropes, as horror frequently does, or if it's just this author writes like that. Either way, I didn't really want to stick around to find out because I thought it was terrible. So I went ahead and DNF'd it. So yes, it does mean that I DNF'd 3 books because apparently like that's just how it goes sometimes. And then I did pick up The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. So this is a kid's graphic novel, and I've actually read this before, but the premise is that we're in this fantasy alternate dimension, whatever, and there's these tea dragons that essentially are tiny, and they grow like different kinds of tea leaves on their horns, and they need to be cared for. And so we have our main character of Greta, who has been learning to be a blacksmith, but then decides that she is going to learn to care for these dragons. And the story goes from there. And I have read this before. I actually read it like 2 months ago, but I read it digitally. And I saw a copy of a different book in this series at my library. And I was like, oh, it's like oversized. And I picked it up and started flipping through it. And I'm like, oh, this is actually a different experience with it being physical copy. And so I decided to go ahead and pick this one up as well as the other 2 in the series. And so I reread this, and it was just as delightful as it was the first time. It's very simple because it is a kid's story, but it was still very sweet, very heartwarming, and I enjoyed it. So 4 stars. So now, as for what I'm in the middle of, well, I'm technically still in the middle of A Red Rose Chain by Seanan McGuire, the 9th book in the October Daye series. But I read 0 pages in this. I'm also still technically in the middle of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, the first book in the Wayfarers series. And I have read 0 pages in this one too. And then the only other thing to add is that I did pick up Nightmare Magazine's special issue, People of Color Destroy Horror, guest edited by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And so I have read 2 short stories so far, and like the first one was fine, but not really my cup of tea. The second one I really didn't like. I understood what was being done and why. I just didn't like reading it. So I am on page 26, the 3rd short story. So we shall see how this goes. But as for next week, I'm going to continue on reading these, and I'm going to alternate it with the other 2 books in the Tea Dragon Society series by Kay O'Neill, because like I can't just read a bunch of short stories in a row, especially horror. I want something just kind of nice as like a palate cleanser, so I'm going to use these books to do that. But I do want to get further in this magazine, I guess. I also have Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I am very excited to read this. I have heard very many good things. And then I also do want to get further along in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. That would be really nice. And then if my buddy reads more in A Red Rose Chain, which I don't actually think she's going to next week, I will catch up and make sure that I stay pretty close to where she is at. But that is it. That's everything I've read and DNF'd and what I'm in the middle of and what I think I'm going to be getting to next. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books that I mentioned in this particular update, or let me know in a comment down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!